Well, as many of you know, I don't give many speeches these days, which is kind of one of the good things about being in the private sector. It's distinct from being in the government sector, I suppose. But in all the years when I did have to give speeches, I never really worked out which was the death slot. Was it the one immediately before lunch, where everybody was falling asleep because they were tired and blood sugar levels were falling down and everyone was just sort of feeling, when's lunch and what's for lunch? Or is it the one straight after lunch where everyone's had a comfortable lunch and now the blood is working in the stomach and there isn't much in the head, right? So I hope I can keep your attention for the next 20 minutes or so. But thank you very much for allowing me to speak at this function. As decision makers and people in the industry who influence policies, I think that you well recognise that there's one powerful driver in our industry which makes us a bit different to most industries, and that's the rapid and indeed relentless development of technology. You know, technology can be unpredictable, it's often surprising, it sometimes comes earlier than we expect, but often it's frustratingly slow to develop into commercially viable propositions. And often it lets us down in terms of the initial vision. Witness, for instance, the 3G frenzy a decade ago, which went through a very slow rollout period, and only just now, only in the last couple of years, have we really seen anything approaching the eventual realisation of that vision with the new customer devices, consumer devices such as smartphones. And sometimes, indeed, the technology is downright disappointing, and hands up those who remember LEOs. Remember what LEOs were? Low Earth orbiting satellites. And some of us in business lost a lot of money on those. And there was CT2, and remember CT2? And so on and so forth, right? So anyway, let me not dwell on the unpleasant sides of the business, but as a host of this forum, we're very privileged to be able to provide a platform where we can discuss some of the issues that face our industry today, and hopefully this forum can contribute to finding some sort of common ground as we move forward. Now, I often think, and having lived in Hong Kong now for 18 years, that this is actually a marvellous place to hold a forum such as this. And Hong Kong is something of a laboratory. You know, its intensity, its world-class infrastructure here across all segments of the economy, its ambition to prove itself a world city, and the hustle. I mean, you only have to walk down the street and you feel the hustle in Hong Kong. These things all combine to put us out in front of a lot of things, because the issues are put in front of us a lot earlier than many places in the world. And just because we get the issues a lot earlier, we somehow seem to have a knack of finding some solutions to these a bit earlier than most people elsewhere find. So in some respects, looking at what we do in Hong Kong offers something of a glimpse into the future. Now, I trust as you spend some time here in Hong Kong, you'll have a chance to try, my company services. We've put up some booths at the back, and I hope you've had a chance to see some of the things that we're doing. And some of them, indeed, we think are pioneering, particularly our IPTV service and the way that we've done seamless roaming between Wi-Fi and HSDPA, and we manage data sharing. And all of these, indeed, are intrinsic parts of the innovations that go to delivering what we call a quad play experience to our customers every day of the week. So what you see here is not demoware. What you see is what we sell to the customers. Now, it is a truism that the future is very difficult to predict. A couple of decades ago, I think my predecessors in this company would never have predicted that PCCW, as the incumbent telephone operator and the monopoly at that time, would have become the integrated telecom and media and IT player that it now is. This transformation process, I think, lends itself to a very long speech, and I'm going to spare you that speech today. I won't dwell on it, but if you haven't already talked to some of my colleagues in the meal breaks about our experiences, then please do so, because some of it's been fun, some of the transformation's been fun, but some of it hasn't been fun. And And there are some lessons which I think other players can learn from our experience. What I do want to discuss with you today is a specific question about whether the policy and the regulatory framework that we adopted globally in the massive liberalisation rush of the 1990s, and we still continue to employ that model 15 or so years later, whether that's in fact served us well or hasn't it, and what it might mean in terms of future policy and regulation. Let me start by looking at our experience here in Hong Kong. In this rather affluent city with a very, very high GDP per head and a highly concentrated population, one would have thought that the business prospects in this sector would be second to none and they'd be very attractive. But unfortunately, the market is highly fragmented, highly saturated, and low in growth prospects. And it is famous for being one of the most intensely competitive telecoms markets on the planet. Over the years since the liberalisation of the telecom market in Hong Kong, it was liberated in 1995, competition in Hong Kong has certainly led to successful innovations and considerable benefits to consumers. There is no denying that prices are lower and services such as 100 megabit per second, symmetrical, believe it or not, are available from several operators in this city, including PCCW, and available at prices that most consumers in USA, North America, Europe pay for a 1.5 or 2 megabit per second service if they can get it. Indeed, in terms of prices, services, penetration levels, etc., Hong Kong consistently ranks at or near the top of the global leagues. But I can't help asking if the late Deng Xiaoping's famous expression applies here in Hong Kong, in our sector. Remember once he was challenged about China's opening up policies, and his response was very, very clever. It's always stuck with me. He said something to the effect that when one opens a door, one has to accept some flies coming in. Consumers, undoubtedly in Hong Kong, have been very happy to pocket the price savings brought by competition. But have we now reached a point where the margins are so thin that we're starting to see collateral damage? I suspect that the surge in complaints against various industry sales practices that we've seen in the last year or two is a warning sign. We as a company, PCCW, do not condone malpractice. We have a very strict code of ethics. But when the consumer prices are so low and sales commissions are unable to support a salesperson's livelihood, is it inexplicable that some corners are cut and quality of service and the customer experience suffers? The remedy, some might say, is that we should be cracking down and regulating on sales practices. With respect, I would think that that's attacking the symptom and not the underlying cause. The issue is more an unhealthy balance in the industry where the competition is on price and price alone, and not on building of long-term viable business models. All business, no matter what sector of business you're in, requires a balance to be struck between producers on the one side and consumers on the other. In our industry, where we make long-term investments, and we're talking about 20-year economic lives in our various technology platforms, we must make a sufficient margin to pay back those investments, accumulate funds for the next cycle, because in this industry there'll always be a next cycle, and provide a reasonable return to our shareholders. Short-term business strategies based on price cutting to win market share do not serve consumer interest well in the long run when service quality is squeezed ever lower and lower. So despite 15 years of competition in Hong Kong, it would seem that our market is still quite a distance from achieving the right balance between producers and consumers. I think it is regrettable and will only result in more and unnecessary customer experience issues and, unfortunately, more regulatory intervention, until eventually the industry lurches towards a state of maturity and stability such as that evidenced in virtually every other sector of the economy. So while our sector is struggling through its period of immaturity, and perhaps one could say going through growing pains or a period of adolescence until it finally grows up, how has PCCW succeeded in building its business, and how have we remained as the undisputed leader in the sector? Now, we've certainly succeeded. There's absolutely no doubt about it. We're alive and we're very well. We're one of the few telcos on the planet that still is retaining its fixed lines. For 6 years straight, we have held our fixed line market share at about, call it close to 70%. Right? And we've been growing our EBITDA basically year after year. But we've succeeded not by lowering prices as a simple price-cutting strategy. Yes, we can be price leaders, and yes, we can meet the competition, because regulatorily we are no longer considered dominant. But what we have learned is that our customers want more from us than simple price reductions. So we have achieved transformation and maintained our leadership position by offering value for money services based on investment, innovation, and customer care. Continuous innovation has been our key to becoming an effective competitor and has led us to develop the quad play. For those that come to Hong Kong from time to time or live here, you'll recognise this is our quad play symbolism. With a population of about 7 million people, or about 2.2 million households in Hong Kong, we are served by 5 facility-based carriers, not resellers, 5 facility-based carriers on the fixed side, and we have 5 facility-based carriers on the mobile side. So we are a highly saturated market for telecom services. But despite that, as the largest telecom provider, we serve almost 2.6 million fixed lines for business and homes. We have 1.3 million broadband lines, making us comfortably, very comfortably, by a long chalk, the largest broadband provider in Hong Kong. We have over 1.4 million mobile subscribers, and our IPTV business, despite the fact that we started it only in 2003 and we were number 4 in the market when we started as a pay TV operator, we have now become number 1, and we have over 1 million customers, or more than 40% of households. Our strategy has been to build up the quad play brands and the propositions under the PCCW umbrella. Navigator is synonymous with broadband access, both fixed broadband and mobile broadband. And Now TV, our IPTV offering, is Hong Kong's leading pay TV service and a household name. Likewise, when we re-entered the mobile market, we built the smallest operator in the market into a quality leader. And we believe that there's a lot of life left yet in the fixed line business. Hence, we've developed a series of multimedia devices to take our fixed line business beyond telephony. And yes, our iDevices still allow you to make a phone call, but they allow you to watch 180 channels of television or YouTube or buy a pizza and a whole range of other services. We drew this map some time ago of a vision of having all of our content appearing live simultaneously on 4 platforms. And indeed today that's exactly what we do. So this enables the customer to decide what access technology do they want to use, what's the most convenient, any time of day. And we've made substantial investments in building out our network in such a way that we would have one common piece of infrastructure servicing all of these access technologies. To give you a trite but important metric, we've done this because we've installed so much fibre in Hong Kong, in this small city of Hong Kong, that if you took all the fibre strands and joined them together, I don't know who would have the time to do that, and then if you wrapped it around the equator, you'd find it would go at least 33 times around the equator. Right? So that gives you an estimate, just the sort of scale of investment that one has to do to be able to supply what seems to be a very simple consumer proposition.